Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear friends. Welcome to this session of our Quran 14 series. We have been discussing so many topics from the Quran, and the purpose, as I always would like to stress, is that to engage in dialogue and discussion regarding the Quran. And there are so many directives of the Quran that at times we are not fully aware of. So a constant reading of the Quran is needed, and as people who would like to know what God's directives are, would like to know how He would like us to behave, of course, it is out of pure curiosity and attachment to God that all of us are inclined and impelled to study the Book of God. And remember, when we study the Book of God, it's always very important that some of the facets and some of the areas that we study, they are not just meant for our own intellectual satisfaction or our intellectual uh, solace, so to speak, but they have a very strong message for us as well. And that message actually relates to the fact that we need to do and follow some of the things that we have been told. So something very similar I'm going to talk about today, and that relates to our responsibilities as well as the responsibilities of people in general who have been given positions of authority by Prophet, by the Almighty. So you see, as far as disseminating religion is concerned, we have to understand this fact that just as something that we find ourselves to be very inspired of, we would like it's very natural that whenever some thing comes our way and we are inspired of that thing, we automatically would like to share it with our friends, with our brethren, with our colleagues, and all the people that we know, because we think that whatever we have found out is it's such a great truth that if I am really happy with it, my own folks would really be enjoying these facts of life. So one of the areas which the Quran talks about is that it's not just sufficient to have strong faith in God, and it's not just sufficient to do righteous deeds, as like the fact that we are all required to behave as extremely upright individuals, connect to people in a very affectionate way, and at the same time also connect with God. But there is another aspect which the Quran actually tells us, and that is that there is an obligation that people owe to their society. There is an obligation that all of us owe to the society that we live in, and that obligation stems from our own personal concern for the society that we live in. We should be well wishers of people around us, and this aspect in which we would like to transmit what righteousness is, what the truth is, to people around us is termed as preaching and or persuasion. And in the words of the Quran, it is called da'wah. Da'wah is an Arabic word which means calling people towards the truth. Now, as far as this preaching responsibility is concerned, the way that the Quran explains it is that it has different categories, and that responsibility actually manifests itself in these categories, and then these categories are given certain directives which they need to follow. So, just let me give you some more details regarding these directives. So you can see that as far as these Quranic directives on preaching are concerned, if you categorize them, and it's very important to understand the Quran by categorizing a lot of the things that it says. So we'll find out that these directives are given in five major categories. So there is this preaching obligation of prophets of God, and all prophets of God, they were required to transmit and communicate the message of God to their addressees. And being prophets of God, being messengers of God, they had this special responsibility. And then there is another category in which the progeny of Abraham, and by progeny of Abraham, of course, we refer to the two main branches his of his descendants, the Ishmaelites and the Israelites. So we know that the Ishmaelites, they descended from Prophet Ishmael, who was, of course, one of the sons of Abraham. And the Israelites, they actually descended from the Isaac, who was another son of Prophet Abraham. So, in the two branches of Abraham's progeny, certain special directives were given, and these directives actually constituted their preaching obligation. And today, we are part of we are not purely the Ishmaelites or the descendants of Ishmael, but after accepting faith, we are like people who are added to that category or to that collective capacity in which the Ishmaelites or the descendants of uh, Prophet Muhammad, of course, or Prophet Ishmael, and the person who came, the last prophet who came in his progeny was, of course, Prophet Muhammad, and people who accepted faith in him, and of course, later on they converted. Uh, Purely people who accepted faith amongst the Ishmaelites were called Ishmaelites, the Bani Ismail, and and people from other nations who became part of that polity, of course, assumed a secondary position, but still they were part of it. And then we have this third category. This third category is the preaching obligation of the scholars, which is again a distinct responsibility that they have to actually discharge. And in the fourth category, we have the preaching responsibility or the preaching obligation of rulers, which in other words means that people who rule a Muslim country, they have a specific responsibility which they need to discharge. And finally, we have the preaching obligation of an individual, like for ourselves. There are certain categories and there are certain directives that we as individuals need to discharge. And this is something which is also very important because it directly relates to our own person. So these are the five categories which the Quran has discussed, and we will discuss each of them separately, and of course try to understand how and where we stand to contribute. So there is this preaching obligation of prophets of God. There is this preaching obligation of Abraham's progeny. We have preaching obligation of scholars of, of the Muslim Ummah. We have the preaching obligation of rulers, and finally, we have the preaching obligation of an individual. The reason that these are five distinct categories is that the nature of obligation, the nature of responsibility is different for all five of them. They cannot be intermingled. For example, the responsibility of the scholars cannot be taken up by rulers, and the responsibility of the rulers cannot be taken up by an individual, and the responsibility of preaching, which is imposed on Abraham's progeny, cannot be actually discharged by a prophet. So all of them have a distinct ring to them. They have distinct features to them, which are specifically meant for them, and they just cannot be intermingled in any way. So let's start off by discussing each of these categories so that you are able to understand how important it is regarding these five categories to be kept distinct and understood separately. So, as far as the preaching obligation of prophets of God is concerned, it is mentioned specifically in this verse or these set of verses that you see on your screen. The first of them is our verses 45 and 46 from Surah 33, which is Surah Ahzab. The words are, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira wa da'iyan ila Allahi bi'iznihi wa sirajan munira. So, by addressing Prophet Muhammad, this is how the Almighty or informs him of this responsibility, and because of the fact that he represents the whole community of prophets, all other prophets before him also were given this responsibility. So the words are, O Prophet, we have sent you forth as a witness, a bearer of good tidings, and a warner, and as one who shall call men to God by his leave, and a shining lamp for the guidance of mankind. So you can see that there are three very distinct, or in fact four distinct responsibilities, which are spelled out by these verses. It says Shahid, Mubashir, Nazir, and Da'i. So Shahid, of course, means the person who witnesses, who bears witness, and here it actually means that the prophets of God, they bear witness to God's religion. What does that mean? They actually present that religion in such a inclusive way that people who are who listen to them, who are their ummah, they don't have any excuse to deny it. So it's a conclusive communication of the truth. Mubashir means they they give glad tidings. They give this good news that people who accept this call will be rewarded not only in this world but also in the hereafter. And then he's a Nazir, which means that he's a warner. He warns people of the hereafter that if they don't accept this message, then they might suffer very dearly in this world as well as in the hereafter. And finally, it says, وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ. He calls people to God. دَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ. Yani, through God's permission, he, prophets of God, they call upon people that come to God, come and profess faith in God and follow His directives. So this is like a very important set of verses which tells us the preaching obligation of prophets of God. As prophets of God, they have to bear witness to the truth. They have to give glad tidings of people who accept the truth. They have to warn people if they don't accept the truth, then something very grave will be faced by them. And finally, summing up, they are very, very earnest callers and very, very earnest summonizers who summon people to the path of God. Now, this is the responsibility of prophets of God. Now, I've explained this, I think, in some of our earlier sessions, that amongst these prophets, there is a category which is called the Rasul. And these Rasul actually, they are people who deliver the truth to such an extent to their foremost adversaries that if they deny that, then they are punished in this world. And this is something which the Almighty is going to do in the hereafter. So remember, we studied that prophetic period and the post-prophetic period in which we actually discussed the fact that the day of judgment is something that all of us at times tend to lose sight of. I mean, it's not always fresh in our minds. So one of the ways in which the Almighty has reminded us of the hereafter is that He has created lesser days of judgment in the times of His messengers. So there's going to be a greater day of judgment in which we shall all be held accountable before the Almighty. But before that happens, in the prophetic era, or the era from Adam to Muhammad, in which there were several messengers, which were a category apart from the prophets. Remember, prophets of God, they just deliver the truth and then they just go away. But as far as the Rasul are concerned, the messengers are concerned, it's not just that they deliver the truth. They decisively deliver the truth in a way that if they deny the truth, then their nation is punished in this world, so that this punishment tells us that this is going to happen in the hereafter also. So we need to mend our ways. Today we are living in this post-prophetic era in which messengers no longer come. But we have to remind ourselves that remember what happened in the prophetic era in which messengers used to come. They decided the fate of their nations and they left, and they were rewarded or punished in this world, so that this worldly reward and punishment can be can bear ample testimony that in the hereafter also this accountability is going to take place. So this is the second facet of the preaching obligation of prophets of God. First facet, of course, relates to all prophets, but the second facet relates to prophets who are designated as messengers, or Anbiya, which are designated as Rasul. So in the cases of the Rasuls of God, the messengers of God, their fate is decided in this world, and therefore, regarding them, we have to understand that they are given this special responsibility of punishing people in this world. I mean, the punishment is from God. So God uses His messengers and their companions as weapons to punish such people. But this punishment can only take place in the prophetic era, in the times of messengers of God. This cannot be extended to the post-prophetic era. I think we have discussed that. And actually, by not understanding this cardinal principle that we have unfortunately started to behave inadvertently as if we are also messengers of God. And because of the fact that these messengers punished people for intentional denial, today the likes of Osama bin Laden and Mullah Umar and ISS and the Taliban and so many other groups, they have sprung up by not understanding this particular verse and these particular aspects of the Quran, in which the punishment which was given to the immediate adversaries of a Rasul, of a messenger, was because their intentional denial was known. This denial, I mean, this delivery of the truth was made by none other than the Prophet of God, by a messenger of God. So it was in its ultimate extent. And when they denied, the Almighty told His respective messenger that now they have completely denied. There's no chance of them to come back, and the punishment has to be delivered to them. So this is something which was specially meant for the Rasuls or the messengers of God, and this happened in their times. And I think I've discussed this earlier on as well. By not understanding this aspect, we have extended this responsibility because we think that we have to follow a Rasul or a messenger in every way without realizing that this is something specific to the person of a messenger. We have taken on our own selves. When I say we, of course, I refer to the people who have taken upon themselves to militarily punish people for their crimes, and I mean, refer to the fact that these groups like the Taliban and the ISS, they have all arisen because of the fact that they think that it is now, after the passing away of the messengers, it is now their responsibility to give this punishment. Whereas we have seen from the Quran that this just happens in the times of messengers, and it is not the messengers actually who do that. It is God who says that I'm going to punish people for this intentional denial, and I'm going to use my Rasuls and their companions. And at times he does not even use them. So he sends natural disasters. So, for example, in the case of Prophet Lot, Prophet Moses, I mean, not Moses, Prophet Lot, we have Abraham's nation, we have Hud alayhi salam's nation, we have Salih alayhi salam's nation, we have Shoaib alayhi salam's nations. All of them were destroyed by natural calamities because they had intentionally denied their messenger. So this is how it works. And therefore, if we don't understand that this preaching obligation is specific to God's messengers, we end up discharging it ourselves. And all this disruption of peace which has taken place in the last 50 or 60 years, or maybe even more, since the annulment of the Caliphate of the Ottoman Empire, this militancy on the part of Muslims has arisen because of not understanding the fact that this punishment of the disbelievers was something specific to the messengers of God. It cannot be extended in the post-prophetic era. So you see how important it is to understand that this is something which cannot be extended. It cannot be extrapolated to ordinary people after messengers of God pass away. So hence it is extremely important. And look what it's the Quranic verse which actually spells out this law tells us. This is mentioned in verse 47, Surah number 10 of the Quran. It says, "Likulli ummatin Rasul." So every ummah has a messenger. فَإِذَا جَاءَ رَسُولُهُمْ قُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْقِسْطِ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. For each community there is a messenger. Then when their messenger comes, their fate is decided with justice, and they are not wrong. So their fate is decided. That would mean that they are punished in this world for their denial. And remember, this denial is not because of any confusion or because of any disinformation or misinformation. No, it is intentional. It is deliberate. So this is why the punishment is so harsh. It says that if you are going to deny something in spite of being convinced about it, then you shall be taken to task. And this is actually what happened in the times of these messengers. So this was our first category that we need to understand. It is distinct, and as I said, it cannot be mixed with other categories. Now we have a second category, and this second category actually relates to the progeny of Abraham. The progeny of Abraham, of course, all of them were not prophets, some of them were, but as a whole, this is regarding a promise which the Almighty made with Prophet Abraham. So what happened was, as you all know, that the Almighty tested Abraham in a number of matters, and when he fulfilled them, the Almighty said, "Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama." I'm going to appoint you as the leader, the religious leader of mankind, of your time. And that leadership actually was a result of Abraham being so obedient to God and passing a number of tests. And the most difficult of those tests, as you would remember, was the dream that he was shown in which he was asked to sacrifice his son before the Almighty. I've explained this also in some of our other sessions, that the purpose of showing this dream was to ask Abraham to dedicate his son Ishmael for the service of the house of God. So, and the way it was shown to him was that as if he was sacrificing, he was slaughtering his son. But remember, we have discussed this, that as far as dreams of the prophets of God are concerned, many of them are symbolic in nature. And this particular dream, in which Abraham was told to sacrifice Ishmael, had that symbolic ring about it, which meant that as father, he was required to dedicate Ishmael to the service of the house of God, and therefore not extract from him any worldly chores, but to dedicate him for the service and custodianship of the house of God. But Abraham interpreted that dream literally, and he was even prepared to take the life of his son. And of course, this was a huge, huge death. We can just shudder at even the thought of it. But this is how it happened, and the Almighty has told us in the Quran that He ransomed this sacrifice through by not actually allowing Abraham to do this, because the Almighty never asked Abraham to do so. All He asked was to dedicate his son. And the way this dedication was actually asked was by showing him a dream in which he was like slaughtering his son for himself, as if dedicating it for the cause of God. So it is after this that Abraham's progeny was selected for a particular purpose. Now you know that Abraham's progeny has two distinct branches, and Abraham's two prominent sons, Ishmael and Isaac. They were the ones from whom this progeny sprung forth. So first of all, the progeny of Isaac was given this responsibility. We know that Isaac's sons, Jacob, and then his sons, Joseph, and they were all prophets of God, one after the other. And they were given this responsibility of creating an Ummah. And this Ummah actually was created till the time of Moses. So in the times of Prophet Moses, which was approximately about 1,000 years, or maybe 700 years, I would say, after Prophet Abraham, somewhere like that, that the whole Ummah was constituted and given this responsibility of delivering the truth. Before them, of course, they also had this responsibility, but this responsibility was in their collective capacity. Now, the nature of this responsibility is that if they discharge their obligation as true adherence to the truth and to justice, God elevates them to be amongst the leaders of mankind, religious leaders of mankind, as well as the political leaders of mankind. The progeny of Abraham, they stand at the pinnacle of all nations. They cannot launch any offensive. They cannot do it militarily, as was the case with the preaching obligation of Rasuls. No. In this case, all that the Almighty asks is that as far as the adherents of the progeny of Abraham are concerned, their descendants, if they adhere to religion in their collective capacity, then the Almighty will create circumstances in which Abraham's progeny will rise and will always be on a position of leadership of the world. So this leadership was first given to Isaac's progeny, which of course was one branch of Abraham's descendants. And when they failed to discharge their responsibility after almost 2,000 years of this responsibility, it was then transferred to the other branch, the Ishmaelites, with the advent of Prophet Muhammad. So for both of them, the promise is, for the Israelites also, the promise was that if they adhere to their religion in their collective capacity, then the Almighty will grant them the leadership of mankind. Similarly, the same promise today is for the Ishmaelites, or the followers of Prophet Muhammad. So today, if we were to adhere to the religion in our collective capacity, especially the Ishmaelites, and as a result, in a secondary capacity, all of us also, then if that happens in this collective capacity, we don't need to do anything. God will create circumstances in a way that the progeny of Abraham, of course, in this case of Ishmael, would be given the leadership of the world. Now, this particular background is discussed here in this verse of Surah Hajj, verse number 78. It says, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ وَاجْتَبَاكُمْ وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ من قبل وفي هذا ليكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وتكونوا شهداء على الناس. And struggle for the cause of God in a befitting manner. He has chosen you for this responsibility. Now, this is the responsibility that we are talking about. So, Abraham's progeny is given this responsibility and laid on you no burdens in the observance of your faith. He has chosen for you the way of Abraham, your father. He has named you Muslims earlier and in this period of the last prophet as well. So, this is how they were named Muslims in the times of Prophet Abraham. I mean, it's not a new name. Muslim is the name given to his followers by Prophet Abraham. In the time of the last prophet and the time of course, the Quran also, they have been given the same name. So remember, the word Muslim is not something specific for the followers of Prophet Muhammad. No, it was the name given by Abraham to his followers, which in other words means that the followers of Jesus, the followers of Moses, the followers of all the progeny of Abraham was Muslim. It was not Christian, it was not Jew. So all of them were given this name. In fact, we can even extrapolate that before even Abraham came, the progeny of previous prophets of God also were required to profess Islam. And they were, because literally the word Islam means to submit to God. So in that capacity, all the followers of all prophets of God have been termed as Muslims. And therefore, these names as Christians or Jews or followers of other prophets, they have been given by people themselves. This is not what the Almighty wanted. For him, all followers of prophets of God were called Muslims. And specifically, he says that, look what Abraham named his progeny. وَسَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ Ibrahim. You are the progeny of your forefather, your ancestor Abraham. And he named you Muslims earlier, and in the last period, min qablu wa fi haza, liyakuna rasulu shahidun alaykum wa takunu shuhada ala nas, which means God has chosen you, referring to the Ishmaelites, so that the Prophet may bear witness against you and that you yourselves may bear witness to this religion against other people of the world. So this is how this responsibility is to be discharged. That we, if we, in our collective capacity, adhere to religion, we bear witness to the truth, we bear witness to this religion and follow it in letter and spirit, the Almighty will grant us the leadership of the whole world, of the rest of mankind. This has been mentioned in Surah Baqarah as well. It says that, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama, O Abraham, we appoint you as the leader of mankind. And when Abraham questioned it, what about my progeny? He was given this answer in that surah that, well, only those among your progeny will be the recipients of the same promise. The same promise will be connected with them if they adhere to the truth and to their religion in their collective capacity. So this is now another aspect that we have to understand. And this is the second category which is mentioned in the Quran, that Abraham's progeny will lead all other people if they adhere to the directives of religion. And for this, they will not need to wage any war or do it militarily or do it forcefully. The Almighty will create those circumstances for them. Okay, now let's move on to our third category. Remember, there are 5 categories. So the third category refers to the obligation or the preaching obligation of the scholars of the Ummah. And this has been mentioned in verse 122 of Surah number 9, which is Surah Tawbah. It says, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ وَلِيُنْذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. And it was not possible for all the believers to undertake this job. So why did not a few from every group among them come forward to gain sound knowledge in religion, and after attaining this knowledge, warn the people of their respective nations when they return to them, that they may also take heed. So you see, the fact that there has to be a scholarly tradition in the Muslim Ummah which is going to succeed the prophets of God, of course not in their prophetic capacity, but in their capacity of being people who know the true knowledge regarding what religion is. So this was to continue, and for this, the first thing which the Quran said, that of course everyone cannot become a scholar. It's not that all of us are required to become scholars. So it actually urges us and says, well, if it's not possible for all of you to undertake this job, so at least a few of you should come up and make it your life commitment that just as you are professionals in your own field, you could be doctors, you could be engineers, you could be artists, you could be architects, you could be IT specialists, you could be everything. But just as you opt for these professions, maybe some of you should also opt for becoming sound and competent scholars of religion. And look what it says. It says that the purpose is that you come and لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, you gain deep understanding. You try to understand in depth what the Quran tells us, what religion tells us. You become specialists in religion. You become doctors in religion. And then what do you do? وَلْيُنْزِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ, you go back to your people and you warn them of the hereafter, that there is going to be a day in which you would be held accountable. And of course, when you warn people of the hereafter, you have all sorts of questions which they pose on you. And it is here that you must have a sound understanding of religion. As scholars, you must know that why the Quran asks us to believe in one God. You must know all the reasons. Why is it that there is going to be a day of judgment? Why is it that the Quran has given certain directives, like, for example, praying, for example, fasting, although all these directives were originally instituted by the Sunnah, but of course the Quran refers to them. So religion as a whole tells us to do a number of things. So this deep understanding of religion has to be the subject and the objective of some individuals. So it's a tremendous appeal which is put forth in this verse. It's like it jolts us, it shakes us that although not everyone can become a scholar of religion, but a few of you should come out, should dedicate your lives to understand what religion tells us, deeply understand the language of the Quran, deeply understand the context of the Quran, its history, the way it speaks, its nature of arguments, its language, so that whenever someone asks you regarding any question, you have the ability to answer that person. You have the ability to find out what the truth is. And of course, for this, it is indispensable that you know the Arabic language of the Quran in its depth. You are able to understand how the Quran progresses, how it reasons out, how it actually asks us in certain ways to follow it. So this is the preaching obligation of the scholars, and then their purpose, their objective is to warn their nation. So basically, the scholars of this ummah, their job is to warn people that there is a day that will come in which all of us will be held accountable. And as I said, during the course of this warning, they have faced with all kinds of questions. They are faced all kinds of objections which people might have. So they have to be competent enough to answer these questions. They have to be competent enough to teach the Quran in a literary way, in an academic way. So all these aspects actually make them qualified to become scholars of religion or doctors of religion. So this particular verse actually asks some of us to do so, and of course, the appeal here is so moving that one is literally shaken with the nature or the words that are spoken. Okay, now we go on to the fourth aspect or the fourth category. So, studied three categories. This is the fourth category. The fourth category relates to the preaching obligation of the rulers, which means the people who rule us. And for them, there are four, obligations that they have to discharge. And let me just read out this. In fact, the details of those four may be discussed under the political directives of Islam in our last session. But here, this particular aspect is discussed in a very, very precise way in the third surah of the Quran, and it is verse 104. It says, "وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ." It says, and there should be people among you deputed to call towards righteousness. So it's like addressing the society of Muslims and telling them that there have to be people amongst you who, of course, in their capacity as people who rule, they must call people towards righteousness by joining good and forbidding make this arrangement shall achieve salvation. So the obligation of the rulers is that as far as Maruf and Munkar are concerned, they are of utmost importance for them to undertake. Maruf means universal truths, and Munkar means universal evils. So evils which are regarded to be universal evils, for example, bribery, for example, treachery, for example, embezzlement, for example, extortion. So a Muslim state is required to actually stop these things from going on, even if force is needed. And what is maruf? Maruf means things which are the norms, which are universally or universally accepted by all mankind. For example, to speak the truth, to be just, to be compassionate, to be kind, to be a person who is upright. So, people who are at the helm of the affairs, they are told that in this positive way, they need to educate their masses. So, Ya'muruna bil Ma'ruf would mean that they should employ whatever they can to educate the masses universal truths, regarding universal truths. And that, of course, is very important to understand that these universal truths are something which is common to all religions, which is common to all religions. So, this is how, for example, these rulers can use the Friday sermon for this purpose because they are obligated to lead people in the Friday prayers. So, this is one instance in which they can teach and urge common masses towards righteousness, towards the truth. And as far as stopping them from evil, again, remember the word maruf and munkar, they relate to things which are universally good or universally bad. I mean, it's not just specific to one religion, it's specific to mankind. And this, of course, it's so inspiring, it's so enthralling that when a state is obligated to do away with something which is evil, it's not just evil. I mean, it's not related to religion, it's related to our moral uplift and our moral being. Same is the case with Munkar. So, as rulers, they have this responsibility. And look what the verse tells us at the end. It says, "Only those who make this arrangement shall achieve this salvation or the success in the hereafter." So only those who do this, and because of the fact that the Muslim ruler or the people who govern us, who are at the helm of our affairs, they have this circle of authority as well. So even force can be used to stop munkar, to stop evil. As I said, that the state will be responsible to forcibly stop bribery, to forcibly stop embezzlement, extortion, all things which usurp the rights. It's not just by the word of mouth that they would stop, but because of the fact that they are rulers, they have this right to stop this forcibly as well. Okay, now let's move on to the last and final category of preaching, and this is, of course, something which relates to all of us, which is the preaching obligation of an individual, we as ourselves. So remember, the first four relates to us in our collective capacities because we are also part of the Ummah in some respect or the other. But of course, what is the responsibility of a scholar is only something that he can do. We just cannot do that. For example, if a state is going to do something, it has to be regarding universal truths and universal evils. But for a scholar of Islam, for example, he can talk about any topic because he's a scholarly person, and he can talk about any practice of Islam, any practice of religion, and clarify it. Similarly, as far as prophets of God are concerned, they have their own responsibilities. I've just explained them. So finally, we come to this fifth and final category, which says that we as individuals, what are we required to do? I mean, it's not just praying to God. It's not just, uh, uh, I mean, offering certain worship rituals and being an upright individual, which is enough. No, the Quran tells us that all of us have another extra responsibility, and that is that we have to urge people to do what good is and forbid what evil is. Remember, this is the same word, maruf and munkar, which we just studied regarding the rulers. The only difference is that the rulers can use force to stop evil. But as far as we are concerned, we can only use force in our own circle of authority. The circle of authority of the state is the whole state. But for us, we can only use it depending upon who we are. Thus, for example, if I am the head of the family, I can forcibly stop evil in my family. But I cannot do this by going to my neighbor's house and telling him to stop doing what he's doing bad. This is not my responsibility. This is the responsibility of the state. And you know what? By not realizing this, we have groups, student unions. What they do is that they create nuisance to the society, and they take up the responsibility, which actually was the responsibility of the state. I mean, the state could have asked other people to behave themselves, but I forcibly stop other people. All I can do is I can present my petition in a very friendly way, well, that you're doing something wrong, and you should not do it. But that's all. I just cannot forcibly stop people. Yes, the state can. So you see how important it is to distinguish between these categories. If you don't understand your responsibility, what will happen is you will step into the responsibility of the state, and what the state is required to do, you'll start doing it yourself. So this is verse 71, Surah Tawbah, 9th Surah. It says, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. And believers, both men and women, they urge one another to what is good and forbid what is evil. So, again, as I said, that this is something that we have to understand. The word maruf is something being used, and the word used, which again refers to universal truths and universal evils. It does not refer to religious truths, religious evils, because they could be a separate category. The same thing is now discussed in Surah Asr, which all of us, most of us, I would say, know by heart. So that's also a surah which tells us of our responsibility, just as the previous verse did. It says, "Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa allazina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr." So time bears witness that these people shall definitely be in a state of loss. Yes, except those who accepted faith, number one, did righteous deeds, number two, and urged or exhorted one another to the truth. So this is a responsibility which every person has, and exhorted one another to remain steadfast on it. So you see, tawasaw bil haqq and tawasaw bil sabr. This is where the Quran tells us that all of us have this responsibility. And what is that? To urge people towards righteousness, to tell other people to be good human beings. And when they adopt righteousness, then to urge them to be steadfast on that righteousness, to remain and to persevere on that truth. Because you see, whenever you adopt a path of righteousness or the path of righteousness, troubles are bound to come your way. Trials are bound to come your way. And it is here that you need to steadfast, to remain steadfast. So, as individuals, all of us, we have this obligation to our society and specifically to our inner circle, like for our friends, our families, our colleagues, that whenever we find the chance of speaking about what the truth is, and when the word truth is spoken of course, it refers to the fact that all the maruf, all things which are universal truths, whenever you find your friend lying or cheating or doing something bad, it should actually bother you. It should actually have this effect that you are like to communicate to your friend, well, you're doing something wrong, and in a very polite way, in a very sensitive way, in a very sensible way, in a very wise way, so that your friend doesn't get offended. And if he or she is doing something evil, of course, and that's your responsibility as well to politely tell friends or your family or anyone that is in close contact, well, something wrong is being done, and that we need to amend our ways, to mend our ways. So this is what the Quran tells us. And so you see, one of the aspects which distinguishes a Muslim civilization from the current Western civilization is that this Amr bil Maruf or Nahi al Munkar or the Tawasi bil Haq with Tawasi bil Sabr, in which you think that the communication of righteousness is your responsibility, is something which is oftentimes disregarded in Western societies because they think that this is a person's own individual affair and you must not meddle into the affairs of other people, they behave. On the other hand, the Quran wants us to meddle. And of course, this meddling in the affairs of others is not at all meddling, so to speak. It is being a person who is a well-wisher, a person who would like other people to stop from doing bad things and to do good things. You see, what happens is that it is a responsibility to be sensitive, to be concerned regarding how other people are behaving. So if my brother or my sister is involved in all sorts of universal evils, I should not, just leave him alone or leave her alone. and think that, well, it's his or her business. No, it's my business as well, because I have a relationship with that person, and it would bother me that if that person is indulging in something bad and I'm not doing enough to stop him or her. And remember, correcting someone and conveying what the truth is, it's an art, it's a skill. It's not just something which comes up to you and you, uh, in your frenzy or in your emotional state, you just start stopping that person or start scolding that person. No, this not should not be the case. We all must learn this art of correction, this art of communicating what righteousness is. You have to find the right time to do that. You have to be patient. You have to make that person realize that you are his or her true friend, not someone who is after scolding that person. So you see, all these skills have to be understood in a special way. So with these words, I come to the end of this session, and just to remind you that we have discussed this preaching obligation or this preaching responsibility which the Quran has imposed on Muslims in these five categories. Remember, they are all distinct. And if we mix one with the other, a lot of problems will arise, as I've just explained. For example, the responsibility of the scholars is to talk about religion in depth. If an ordinary individual starts talking about it, he'll make a mess of it because he's not competent enough. Similarly, it is the responsibilities of the rulers to stop by force what is going on as bad in their country. But I cannot do it as an individual. All I can do is I can communicate my concern, but I cannot, get hold of that person. But yes, the rulers can, the law can. So by not understanding this distinction, what we are doing is that we are at times intruding in the obligation of a different category. And the most important of all, if I can say, is that responsibility which I've just discussed in this first aspect, in which prophets of God, especially the messengers, they are given this special responsibility that they can punish people if they don't accept the truth, but none of us can. Only messengers of God have been given that responsibility. It is by not realizing this responsibility that it specifically belongs to those messengers that I just said, that like the likes of Mullah Omar or Osama bin Laden, or there's so many people who have arisen in history with a similar intention, that they have started killing people or punishing people if they are not following Islam. Look at the government of the Taliban, which was established 20 years ago in Afghanistan. Look at even today what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and at times they are not understanding that as far as implementing what righteousness is concerned, the maruf is concerned, that of course is a responsibility of the state, but there is a certain limit to that. It cannot interfere in the private lives, like for example, stopping them from doing certain things or implementing certain things that they would like to do. For example, imposing this public uh, directive that all women have to cover their heads, or all Muslims have to keep a beard. Or, for example, there are so many other examples in which a state is forcibly entering into the private domains of people, which, of course, is something which is of nature of their religion, and that something is something which only a person, he and his God, is concerned with. A state just cannot do that, and all it can do is forcibly stop what is universally evil. Remember that it's what is universally evil, and therefore, if it starts interfering in the private lives of people in religious matters, it would be it would be stepping beyond authority. So, thank you very much for being with me and discussing this all important topic. And I do hope, if, in case you have any questions, and we will be able to discuss them, and especially areas in which we find ourselves at times in a fix. I mean, we could be having a brother or a sister who is doing something wrong, and the important thing is what should be our attitude, and how should we actually try and play our role in that. So my first question in this discussion is just to uh, discuss further what we have just elucidated upon, is that, for example, if there is there is this party going on in my neighborhood, in which people are drinking and doing all sorts of evil things. So in many countries, like for example, where I live in Pakistan, and of course some of the other Muslim countries, like I can say, I can quote the examples of maybe India as well, although it's not a Muslim country, but there's a vast a majority of Muslims living there. That people, I mean, individuals take upon themselves to go and disrupt such parties, and they think that it is their responsibility. So my question, the first question, in the light of today's discussion, would be that if there is a party going on in your neighborhood in which there is this, I mean, drinking going on, and maybe even shameful acts are being committed. So can we, as individuals, go and forcibly stop them from doing that? Okay. So Amira, can I ask you first?
No, I don't think you can forcibly, until unless you're a figure of authority, you can't go and forcibly stop them.
Okay, so what should be done? I mean, if there is something going on in our neighborhood which is not correct, then what is our obligation towards that?
I think to an extent you can go and explain it to them that what they're doing is wrong, and then explain to them why you're doing it, and then if it's their choice, if they listen, if they don't listen, then you've done your duty. Now if they don't listen from the front, then that's their choice.
Okay, let me ask Ariba, Fatima and Ariba, the two sisters here. So Amira just told us that in we don't have the obligation of going and forming such parties. But then what can be done?
You should go to them and advise them, but like try not to break your friendship with them.
Right.
But like basically advise them and tell them the negatives of drinking, and trying to show them that they're doing bad, but like not.
So what about if you're not good friends with them? I mean, they could be neighbors you don't even know. I mean, they have just arrived in your neighborhood maybe a couple of days before you have before you've met them. So going to them and immediately telling them, well,
So
stop
I
this
feel like
or stop.
you should be polite to them, even like polite to them, be nice to them and talk like in a smart way, in a wise way, but not like in a strict, narrowed way. Try to be
Okay,
polite and open.
okay, okay. So Musa and Gamla, would you like to add anything to this suggestion?
I think the best way to, if you want to preach to someone, would be to not go to them, to simply stay where you are, and if they have any questions, come. Because if you try to push someone, they're going to be stubborn about it.
Okay.
However,
So
through your own acts and your own, behavior, you can inspire them and show them what is.
So you would say that you do it by example. I mean, you don't even go to such people and let them do what they're doing, but in your own sense, in your own lives, when you exhibit something which is positive and which is not what they are doing, so it's like you're telling them by leading through example.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask Sine. Sine, what would you do?
Well, I don't know if I would go to the neighbor's house while they were having a party and they were drunk, because the chance of me as an individual affecting their decisions is going to be very limited. So within that moment of time, if it's really bothering me or if I think it's really a havoc to the neighborhood, I might contact the authorities because I feel like it's more their responsibility. But if I feel like maybe the next day in the morning I can go say to the neighbors, hi, what was going on, and maybe have a discussion with them. But eventually it's not my responsibility to stop them. I think going to the authorities or the neighborhood community, whoever's in charge.
Okay, Zara, Bernie, anything that you'd like to say?
I agree with Sine. I think that if there's drinking going on at the party, you can't really sway their decision, and contacting the authorities would be the better decision. And then obviously going and talking to them later about it and how it's.
So there's one problem that might arise when you talk to the authorities. If they come and your neighbor gets to know that, well, my neighbor reported me for misconduct, so they might listen to the police or to the authorities, but wouldn't that create that bad taste between two neighbors. I mean, you reported them, and of course, the police would do something. They would forcibly stop them, and at the same time, it might come to their knowledge that someone who was living just about four houses away, uh, and he or she never came up to me and maybe just went directly to the authorities. So would you suggest to do it in parallel or one after the other, or what should be the strategy?
I think that maybe you could go and tell them how you're feeling, and then if they still don't take into account what they're what you're telling them you're feeling, you should contact the authorities. That way you at least went to them first.
Mm-hmm.
And if they hold a grudge, you can explain your side of the story to them.
Okay, so let me just elaborate further. I mean, for example, if I take your advice and I see such activities going on in my neighborhood, I don't go to the authorities first. I just knock at their door, say hello, hi, and say, well, what was going on last night? And it was, I mean, not really good, and maybe would have avoided it. So, I mean, just knocking at the door and entering their premises, it could be your first meeting with your neighbor. So, would that look okay?
Um, I I'm not really sure if that would be a great first meeting,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's bothering you that much that you feel
Mm-hmm.
the need to um, do something about it, I think it may have to be necessary that that's the first way you meet.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
uh,
Okay. So you see, there is a slight something which all of us do feel that the first meeting in which you are acting as a person who is going to correct the other person is going to be a little odd. So I think all of us feel that. So let me ask Hassan Sharjeel, anything that you'd like to suggest in this situation?
Well, in my opinion, if your neighbors are actually having a party and they're drinking and things, I wouldn't have too much problem with it because it's not really affecting you in any way. They're drinking, it's their health. But if they're causing problems, they're breaking things, then obviously you'd have to go speak to them. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously not when they're drunk because that could get you into trouble.
Right.
So you can,
So you have to wait for maybe a proper time, an opportune time.
yeah, when they're
Uh,
sober or something.
okay.
So,
Okay, Sana. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
when they're I wouldn't do anything about it really, unless they're causing
Mm-hmm.
problems, because they're partying. If you even call the police, it's not really illegal to party
Mm-hmm.
or drink alcohol or something. So
Mm-hmm.
unless they're doing something which is really wrong, then only I would contact the authorities or something.
Mm-hmm. But personally, for example, if you think that consumption of alcohol is something which should not be done, and the people who are doing it, of course, they also believe similarly. I mean, it's not that they don't believe that alcohol is something wrong. I'm just giving a hypothetical situation. Just suppose that you think that drinking is not a right thing, and the neighbors also, in their own hearts, think that this is not right, but it's like a violation that people do by being careless and by disregarding. So, what should be, I would say, it should be our response in such a situation?
I think if it's really up to them, but if they personally have a problem with it and they can't get away from it, then you should try giving them some help because there's
Okay,
some hotlines which you can call for people with problems regarding alcohol.
okay, okay, okay. Manahil, anything that you'd like to say?
Um, Everything that I wanted to say has been said, but basically, the day after, maybe if I'm not close to the person, I would look around the neighborhood, see who's close to the person, maybe discuss the issue with them, so that the person who's close will actually have an impact on what they're saying rather than a neighbor you barely know.
Right.
And
Wonderful.
then maybe I'll give them like a second chance after they discussed it with that person. And if it happens again and again and again, then I would upfront tell them and maybe call the authorities.
Okay, Manahil, you've added one important and significant detail that I mean, it's like always good to have a first meeting in which you are not always correcting the other person. So maybe you go to another neighbor who knows that that neighbor very well and maybe request that person to play his or her role. But you see, all of what you've said, all of the people that have discussed this, I think all of you would agree on one thing, and that's personally what I'd like to suggest is that in all such situations, whenever you see that there is something wrong, I think your first exposure to your neighbors should be not one in which you're just going and talking about what they are doing wrong or even asking other neighbors to interfere. I think the first thing that should happen is that you develop a good friendship, maybe a couple of meetings with them, two, three, or four. So you see, what has happened has happened. Maybe it's going to happen again. But if you've got to play a role in correcting or maybe showing your concern, it has to start off with a positive note. It has to start off by you becoming friends with your neighbors. So ignore what they have done last night. Ignore if they have been rowdy or being very loud or something they've done which they shouldn't have done. So you see, what is important is that if you want to become a well-wisher, if you want to become a person who would like to convey what the truth or what righteousness is, as I just said, it's an art, it's a skill, and you have to learn an art and skill. And you know what the first step of that skill is? That if you want to correct anyone, you first make friends with that person. And when you do so, it might take some time. It's not going to happen immediately because you see, friendship builds trust. Trust builds that confidence in which the other person will always think that when this person is speaking, he or she is speaking out of his friendship or his friendly concern for me. So you see, the first step in correction, even if it is not, directly related to you, is that you must not think that this is something that you are required to do immediately, either to call the authorities or to go to another neighbor or to go to that neighbor for that matter. So the best way to correct someone, as I said, is that first win the heart of that person. First let that person know that you are the friend of that person. And this takes a lot of patience. You know what? At times we get irritated. For example, let's suppose it's not drinking that's going on. Many a times we have these musical gatherings, at least in so many third world countries, in which people are not aware of the rights of their neighbors, and they have those loud noises and loud songs and everything going on without realizing that there could be a person who is sick near their house or he has exams or something. And the party goes on all night and you have a very disturbed sleep. So even in such situations when there is not the element of drinking, when there's this element in which you get disturbed, what they're doing, but what they're doing is disturbing you as well. So even in such cases, perhaps the right line of action would be to first have a very good relationship. Because you see, if you want to change other people, if you would like other people to adopt what good is, it simply cannot be done by use of force. The use of force, which of course is the one when you go to authorities and you report an individual, that should be the last resort. That should be in a situation in which a person or a family is not willing to mend its ways. So first develop that comfort zone between you and them. Let them know how things are going on, how at times whatever they're doing is going to affect their neighbors. And when after reasonable time, when you think that the other person, of course, is not even willing to lend an ear to what you have to say, maybe it would be then only a good idea to involve the authority. So the bottom line is that as far as you are concerned, as Amira said, you just cannot stop them forcibly, number one. Number two, if you have to stop them in a way, then it has to be in a very congenial way, in a very friendly way. Number three, if it is something which relates to your disturbance, then again, you can involve the authorities, but it is much better to talk to a neighbor in a very friendly and a concerned way. And if these steps are not taken, you might end up earning the rivalry of someone that perhaps you would have easily avoided. Okay, now let's discuss another question, and that is something that we have been referring to earlier as well. That you see, there are certain responsibilities which the Quran has given prophets of God, and responsibilities which is given to their messengers, which is a category higher than prophets of God, is that they are given certain uh, prerogatives. They can do certain things which is in line with the fact that they are punishing people on behalf of God, for not accepting what the truth is in spite of being convinced. So one of them, of course, is the fact that you are put in a position that you think that you should not behave in a congenial manner with them. You should not behave in a manner that you even greet them as as people who would send peace to them by saying assalamu alaikum. So one of the things that religious people generally tell us that against non-Muslims you have to show this hostility. You just cannot make friends with your non-Muslim neighbors or non-Muslim friends, particularly if they are Jews and Christians. So anything that you'd like to say regarding the fact that you just cannot become friends with Jews and Christians, because you see there are verses in the Quran which explicitly tell us that we should not make friends with them. So how would you place these verses in the light of what we have discussed today? Maryam Idris, what would you say?
Could you repeat what you said?
So my question is that there are verses in the Quran which tell us that we should not make friends with Jews and Christians, and in fact we should be avoiding them. So could you place these verses in their proper perspective in the light of what we have discussed today? Because the Quran is clearly tells us that these Jews and Christians, they should not be made friends of. And if we find this verse in the Quran and we have so many friends amongst Christians, it's so natural that you have a class fellow or a person who lives in your neighborhood. So is it that we should stop making friends with Jews and Christians as the Quran says, or there's something else to it?
Regarding the situation that you just mentioned with drinking and the partying, I think anyone can do that regardless of their religion. Even if you were Muslim or were Christian, no matter what you believe in, if you commit to something wrong, it doesn't matter who you are. And I think that it doesn't matter what religion you follow. If you yourself decide that you don't want to associate yourself with people who are doing wrong, then that's your choice, and I don't think it relates to what religion you follow.
Okay, that was the question that we just, finished talking about. So this is a fresh question. It tells us that there is a verse in the Quran. There are in fact three verses which tell us that we just cannot make friends with Jews and Christians. So this is a question which is separate from the previous one. And if you come across this Quranic verse which tells you that don't make friends with these Jews and Christians, and it's so explicit. So it's so natural to become friends with people who are in your class and who are absolutely harmless individuals. They would be very good human beings. But here we have the Quran stopping us from making friends with them. So how would you reconcile this? Or is it that you would just refrain from making friends with them? Or would you disregard the Quran and go on and make friends with them? So what would be the course of action that we would adopt?
I don't think there's a reason to stay away from those who follow different religions if there's nothing wrong with them. So I think I would maybe not listen to that so much. I don't think that.
You see, if you are someone who believes in the Quran and God, and if God is telling you not to make friends with Jews and Christians, so there has to be some reason for you to not follow what God is telling us. Okay, let me make this easier for you. So, there are instances in which we have been discussing this, and maybe you've not been present in all the previous sessions, because there were some sessions in which we discussed this explicitly, and today we've discussed this implicitly. You see, these directives which relate to harshness with non-Muslims, especially Jews and Christians, are specifically related to the Jews and Christians of prophetic times, of people who were there in front of Prophet Muhammad, who accepted him as the Prophet of God, who were convinced that he is a Prophet of God. They had absolutely no confusion, but out of hatred, out of envy, out of jealousy, they refused to accept him. It is about such people that the Quran says that such Jews and Christians should not be made friend of. Because about them it was evident, it was absolutely clear that they had denied a prophet of God, not because of any confusion, but because they simply did not tolerate that a prophet should come from the descendants of another branch of Abraham, the Ishmaelites. So this is what made them deny. So remember the Quranic verses which speak very harshly regarding non-Muslims. For example, they tell them that you can put the disbelievers to death. There are actually verses in the Quran which tells us that you can kill the idolaters. Similarly, this verse tells us that you cannot make friendship with them. Then there are verses which say that you have to wage war with them. So all these verses of the Quran have to be understood. Let me just once again flash that thought with you, which tells us about the preaching obligation of the prophets of God. You see, as prophets of God, it is essential that they deliver the truth which has been mentioned. So you see, this is the preaching obligation of prophets of God, that they have to deliver the truth. They are the shahid, which means they give glad tidings. They are the witnesses to the truth. They are the mubashir, which means they have to deliver glad tidings. They are the nazir. They have to warn people. And then amongst those prophets, those who are messengers, for them they have to decide the fate of their nation in this world, because of the fact that if they intentionally deny a prophet of God, then they have to receive this harsh treatment. So you see, idolaters were killed, or they were asked to be killed, although the chance never came regarding a majority of them. But this right was given because of the fact they had intentionally denied a prophet of God. So, or in this case, Prophet Muhammad. So remember all these directives of the Quran, which specifically relate to the non-Muslims, and which in these times I have repeatedly said that, for example, Osama bin Laden, when he waged war on those twin towers, so much before that, he had actually warned that according to the Quran, he has been given this responsibility of destroying the foes of Islam. So remember, the basic mistake that he made was that yes, this verse does exist, but it actually relates to Prophet Muhammad's immediate addressees who were standing there before him, and they were denying him not because of any confusion, but because of jealousy and arrogance. Today, of course, neither do we have a prophet to deliver the truth, nor can we know whether a Christian or a Jew is intentionally or deliberately denying Prophet Muhammad. So, therefore, today, if we start doing the same thing as the Quran has told us, or told the Sahaba, in fact, the companions, to do something regarding which existed in their society, we would be doing something which is extremely wrong. We would be drawing an analogy which is not fit for us to do. So, punishing people or punishing Jews and Christians in the times of Prophet Muhammad was something which is specific to them, because it was they who had clearly denied out of their, in spite of being convinced. So today we cannot simply find out which Jew or Christian is denying the Prophet out of its own conviction, in spite of being convinced about his veracity. And at the same time, we don't have a prophet of God delivering the truth, because in those times, prophet of God, the way they can explain things to the non-Muslims, we just cannot. So therefore, the Almighty has said that this law specifically relates to the immediate addressees of the messengers of God. And by not understanding this preaching obligation, which extends to use of force in the case of messengers, what we have done is that we have started to use it for our own selves. So you see how important it is that we have to understand all those 5 categories in the way that they have been explained in the Quran. If we start mixing up these things, it will start, creating all these confusions. And a very similar confusion will be created if we are non-scholars, for example, and we start preaching regarding basics of religion, which of course need a lot of research and competence. Again, that is a task which has to be left to the scholars. You just cannot become an expert or pose to be an expert, not have sufficient knowledge, and start preaching. So that is why let me just let you once again go through this list. That these 5 categories, as you can see, are of extremely importance, that you understand that they are not. They are not just there for your observation. They are there for you so that you can understand that there are 5 different categories. The obligation of the rulers is different from that of an individual. That of the scholars is different from the rulers. That of the prophets is different from that of the individual. So all of these have to be understood separately, and that is why I have tried to explain them with examples. So thank you very much for being with us today, and in case you don't have any further questions, So I'll call it a day. Inshallah, we'll meet next week with another fresh topic. And do remember that if you have questions, it is extremely important that you do present those questions, because this is how we grow and this is how we learn. So it is Khuda Hafiz from your teacher. Until next Sunday.